So my topic for today is going to be a case-based approach to febrile neutropenia. So as I said, whenever we are faced with a febrile neutropenic patient, no test is good enough, no drug is good enough, no test is fast enough. So most of the times we are dealing with a lot of limitations in whatever setting we work in. So I think the idea is to go beyond those limitations and see what best we can do. So the objectives would be to define and see what the guidelines recommend. And I'll take you through a few cases which I have seen recently and we can discuss about them. So neutropenic fever, we all know, is defined as a single oral temperature more than 101. All of us are aware of these definitions. We know what is severe neutropenia, profound neutropenia, and prolonged neutropenia. So the importance of knowing this is to sort of predict which of your patients is going to be at high risk for bacteremic sepsis. The more profound the neutropenia is, the more chances that your patients will have a bacterial sepsis. Whereas the more prolonged it is and the more profound it is as well, is when the patient goes at more risk for an invasive fungal infection. Next slide, please. Yeah, so usually when we talk about febrile neutropenia, today we'll restrict ourselves to cancer patients. So it's more common in hemato-oncology patients than in the solid organ group. And even in the hemato-oncology, you can further stratify that AML is going to be, any acute leukemia induction is going to be at the highest risk. AML always more than ALL. And generally, when you examine a patient, you are not unlikely to find a focus, clinical focus. So it's just going to be like any other FUO syndrome. And sometimes you might see something like a central axis or say a skin and soft tissue or a pneumonia. And mortality is on an average is around 9 to 12%. But if we don't treat appropriately, especially if there is a gram-negative sepsis or a gram-positive sepsis, it can be as high as 30 to 40%. Okay. So when we talk about, again, basically we want to know what are we going to be dealing with? What is the etiology that we are dealing with when we talk of febrile neutropenia? So this is a very old pie chart, but it sort of holds good even till this date. So most of the times you're going to have an unexplained fever. Maybe in the best of centers, they say that 45% of the times you will have a microbiologically identified infection. Okay. But if you look into the Indian data, most published studies say that the blood culture positivity rate is anywhere from 7% to 20%. Okay. And again, while in the literature, gram positives are more common, for us, gram negatives, especially resistant gram negatives, are what we deal with when we talk about febrile neutropenia. And center to center, there is a huge variability. Like Acinetobacter, Pseudomonas might not be a big problem in one center, but in another center, it might be a huge problem. So having your local data is very important when you want to be dealing with these patients. In the absence of that, the best we can rely on is our national AMR data. So I'll allude to it later. So this is again a very brief thing. So you can have viruses, you can have bacteria, you can have fungi. There are certain things which are common, like say influenza, COVID, RSV among the viruses. Among the bacteria, your E. coli, Klebsiella, and among your gram positives again, cons is very common, coagulase negative staphylococci, Staph aureus, and among the fungi, Candida and Aspergillus are very common. So you would occasionally see some organisms on the right, but always remember that it's not just limited to this table. Every now and then in India, you will have a patient who comes in with TB, dengue, and other things and completely takes you off the febrile neutropenia chart. Okay. So again, when we talk about these gram negatives or gram positives in India, without knowing the resistance mechanisms, we can't take a step forward to manage these patients. So when we talk about gram negative resistance, I'm going to try and keep it very simple. So most important, what we see is ESBL, extended spectrum beta lactamase. So this, even in the community, it's 60 to 80% prevalence. Okay, so the minimum that you will have to cover for in your patients would be for an ESBL resistance mechanism. You can have an E. coli or a Klebsiella where you will have a carbapenemase production. And the most common enzymes that we see here are NDM and OXA48. The guidelines talk a lot about KPC. It's not very common in India. That's more common in the West. And again, when we talk about Acinetobacter and Pseudomonas, they not only produce enzymes, they have other mechanisms like efflux pumps, porine channels. All these are important when you want to choose which drug you want to give your patient. Okay. And gram positive, again, cons, most of them will be methicillin resistant. Staph aureus, again, very wide prevalence, variation in prevalence. One center might say 30, other person might say 80. So important to have your local data. Enterococci, again, usually if you have an Enterococcus faecalis, you would get away with simple drugs. If it's Enterococcus faecium, you might have to use a glycopeptide or higher drugs. Okay. So again, how do I know what I am dealing with? So if you have, this is our hospital antibiogram. So an antibiogram means every 3 months or so, every 6 months or annually, they would collate all the data of the organisms that is there in the hospital and say the resistance, susceptibility data, basically. So this is how it is done. So if you don't have access to that, if your hospital does not provide you an antibiogram, then we can access the ICMR. The ICMR has been releasing this AMR data for the last few years. So the most recent one is in 2023. So they will, if you open it up, you will know E. coli in the OP, what is the resistance rate? In the ICU, what is the resistance rate? So you can use that as your base to decide on your treatment. Okay. So again, we'll move on to the management. So febrile neutropenia is a medical emergency. So you have to rush, you have to draw cultures and plan to give your antibiotics within 30 to 60 minutes of the identification of febrile neutropenia. And there are a lot of risk stratification. I'm not going to go into it. And again, one thing which is worth remembering in India is while all your Western guidelines would advocate drugs like ciprofloxacin, amoxiclav, these drugs are hardly going to be useful in the Indian setting because most of our gram negatives are resistant to these bugs. So then what do we do? Can we not manage a patient as outpatient? So we still manage patients as outpatient, but we use what is known as an IV antibiotics as outpatient. So what would be that? So you will have to have a way of saying who is a low risk patient in whom I can do an OP IV antibiotic therapy. So at least he or she should be hemodynamically stable with no comorbidities or organ failure, no clinical focus basically, and ideally not in leukemia induction. Your solid tumors might do better on outpatient than your hematological malignancies. And anybody with a milder degree of neutropenia probably is better. So some simple things like this you can have to decide whom you're going to admit and whom you're going to send home. Okay. And clinical assessment, I think all of us will know how to do it, but some things which we can ask for is a history of sick contact to know that whether there is a possible viral infection that can be there. Relevant exposures, India, very important to know where they are living, what they are eating, where they traveled, everything is important. All of them will have some implication in your management. And again, knowledge of past microbiological reports. Anybody who has already had an MRSA, important to know because every time they get a febrile neutropenia, then you might have to consider covering for that. So these things are very important. And again, a targeted physical examination, again, all postgraduates would know this, but something which I really want to stress on is like your perianal examination, please don't miss that, genital examination, and subtle changes in mood or personality, especially in children. CNS infections don't manifest with headache, neck stiffness, vomiting, and all that. Most of the times, the child is or a patient is just more sleepy than usual or more angrier than usual. So it's all very subtle. So if you can pick up those clues, then you would be more inclined to imaging and work up for CNS infection. Next slide, please. So these are the initial labs. So generally what I would like to stress here is again about blood culture. So blood cultures, ideally what is recommended is at least 2 sets. By 1 set, I mean 1 aerobic and 1 anaerobic bottle. So minimum what is expected is 40 ml. So if you have a central line, you draw 1 through the line and then 1 through the peripheral prick. That is what is ideal. And other cultures are dependent on what symptoms the patient has. And again, imaging also is dependent on if the patient has any relevant symptoms corresponding to the site. We'll go on, please. So with this, I'll go on to my cases. So this is a 16-year-old, a relapsed acute leukemia who is on a flabby chemotherapy. So he is already on prophylaxis with Cotrim, acyclovir and voriconazole. So day 11 of hospital stay when he's neutropenic, and he develops a new fever with no clinical focus. There is a central line, which is day 11. Okay, so what would you do now? So this is a febrile neutropenia. There is no clinically identified infection. There is a central line in situ, but it is a stable patient. So most likely you will attribute it to the line. So what antibiotic to start? So if I can ask one of you, so what would you do? I can give you some options if you go to the next slide, please. Yeah, should you give piperacillin, tazobactam, cefoperazone, sulbactam, meropenem? Should I give gram-positive cover? Should I give CABA resistant cover. So what would be your choice? Okay, all of you seem to say that you would start with piperacillin tazobactam. Yeah. So yeah, can we go to the next slide, please? So there are two types of approaches when we come to febrile neutropenia. So first is known as an escalation approach. So this is a stable patient. So where you have an uncomplicated presentation. No, this is stable, no known colonization or no previous infection. And there are not, I mean, if your center, no, I mean, most of our centers at least are not teaming with CR organisms in the first instance. So at least we can decide that the minimum that we will cover is ESBL. Yeah, please. Yeah, ESBL cover is minimum that we will have to give. That is what we are trying to do with either piperacillin tazobactam or cefoperazone sulbactam. Please note the dosages are a little on the higher side because you want to cover Pseudomonas, and please use at least an extended infusion of 2 to 3 hours. Okay. So this is for a stable patient. So what do you do if you have an unstable? De-escalation approach is when the patient comes to you in sepsis or septic shock, is already known to be colonized, or where you have high prevalence of carbapenem resistance. Okay, so then, so depending on the mechanism. So always we don't know what mechanism is going on, but if you know, then if it's ESBL you're trying to cover, then you would give carbapenem. So if it's a KPC, which is uncommon, or an OXA48, which is slightly more common, you would get away with ceftazidime-avibactam. If it is an NDM, then mostly along with aztreonam, you would get along. If it's Acinetobacter or Pseudomonas, it's polymyxin-based regimen. So these are the best drugs for these bugs. But when you're doing empirically, most of the times you don't know what you're doing. So you might do a mix and match of two groups of agents before you arrive at your final cultures and try to de-escalate. Okay, so we'll talk about it as we go. So this patient gets started on meropenem by the primary team, but 12 hours later, the central line cultures have flat. So this is sometime in the evening. The patient is still febrile but stable. But around 7 p.m. they call. So the flat for GNV, sorry, the blood cultures, the lab says it has gram-negative bacilli. So now now what do you do? So should you just wait on meropenem? Should you do something more? Okay, so Dr. Nambi will later talk to you about rapid molecular tests. So this is out of hours. So you don't have access to any rapid molecular tests. So you have to make a clinical decision. So when you go back and see, has this patient received any antibiotics? Yes, the patient had received some meropenem and cefoperazone sulbactam, teicoplanin, because just had some thrombophlebitis related fever. Okay, so this is not known unless you go and dig into the charts. All your charts are huge. So we have to go through all those charts to find this data, and then when we find this, then we know that you can't leave this patient on meropenem. You have to go and do some CR cover. So in our center, it's a mix of many things. So we might have to do a beta-lactam, newer beta-lactamase inhibitor with the polymyxin. So then next day, when you have the report which says that it is CR Klebsiella, sensitive to ceftazidime-avibactam, so we continued this, I mean, we stopped the add-on agents like aztreonam and polymyxin and continued on ceftazidime-avibactam. Okay, central line was thought to be the source in this patient because the central line flagged earlier, much earlier than 2 hours earlier than the peripheral line. So central line was removed. So all that is done. So then how long do you continue this antibiotic? That becomes the next question. So duration of therapy. So earlier all the guidelines used to stress on count recovery, or that was the target when you could stop antibiotics. But now we no longer go by count recovery to stop antibiotics. So you can have a documented infection like this patient where you would decide if it's just needs a defined course. It could be anywhere from 10 to 14 days. So I would stop it at the defined point, just making sure that the patient is stable and all the infection features have resolved. Suppose if I don't have anything, if I don't have a idea what was going on, but patients seem to have responded to the antibiotic as early as 72 hours of stability with 48 hours of aflibercept. So most of the times in these patients by day 5, you would be able to stop when you have started them on antibiotics, when they have improved and the cultures are negative, but the patient is afebrile. Okay, so the duration is shorter when you don't have a culture positivity. So this is the second case. So here you have a 20-year-old ALL on induction protocol. Again, day 10 of neutropenia, develops some fever with hypotension. Central line is in place for the last 12 days, has not received any prior antibiotics. But just in the preceding week, there were 2 MRSA bacteremias in the ward. Okay, so something is going on in the ward. We have not fixed it yet. We don't know about this patient, whether he is MRSA colonized or not. So now he gets started on meropenem and teicoplanin, okay, because he is hypotensive. So now always the question is, when do I add a gram-positive cover, be it a stable patient or an unstable patient? So what the guidelines recommend is, if you have an unstable patient or you have a suspected sepsis, septic shock or pneumonia, if the patient is known to be colonized with MRSA, which you think this patient is likely to be, then you are a strong, it's a strong recommendation to add a gram-positive cover. By gram-positive cover, I mean vancomycin or teicoplanin. Linezolid is not advocated because it is a bacteriostatic agent. So, but if you don't, if you have otherwise a patient with a known MRSA colonization or a suspected catheter infection, even if it's a stable patient, you still can start. What is not usually recommended is when they are unstable, but they don't have, just because hypotension is there, but your center doesn't have a lot of MRSA prevalence, or the patient is not known to be colonized with MRSA, routinely you need not add a gram-positive cover at the start. Okay, please move on. So 48 hours later, as expected, this patient grew MRSA in the blood, and meropenem was stopped and teicoplanin was continued. So always when you have a Staph aureus bacteremia, it's mandatory to repeat a blood culture to make sure it clears, and also the line has to be removed. And you use minimum duration, which is recommended, is 14 days. So line removal. So when do I do it in a child with febrile neutropenia? Is always, even in febrile neutropenia for Staph, for NTM, so rarely you will have non-tuberculous mycobacteria growing. Generally, if it's a non-enteric, like non-fermenter, like your Acinetobacter, Pseudomonas, you don't expect them to come from the gut, especially if they are resistant. Please err on the side of removal than trying to be heroic and retain the line. And rare fungi sometimes would come up. In Candida, it's dicey, like you might try and retain if it's not a parapsilosis or a Candida auris, or if the patient is just clearing the Candida, because Candida can also come from the gut. It need not always be secondary to the line. So if the Candida is persistent candidemia, then you might want to remove the line. In cons, which is again very common, you might try to salvage the line just by treating, either with systemic therapy or you can do an antibiotic lock. Okay. So then what do we do? So this patient luckily flagged, both our patients had blood culture positive, but if cultures are not positive and you have started a broad agent like say polymyxin based regimen, or you have started a carbapenem, so how do I de-escalate? So in an AFib, this is what is recommended in the guideline, whether they are afebrile or febrile, if they are stable, just whatever additional you have added, like if you've added a amikacin, if you've added a gram-positive cover, please knock off those things and try and bring it as narrow as possible. So if you've been on a carbapenem, then try and reduce it to say a cefoperazone sulbactam or piperacillin tazobactam. So that is what is recommended. So please next slide. Again, be very cautious if your patient was unstable at presentation. Unstable and you started broad spectrum. See, make sure you get more cultures, get more imaging, make sure your patient is well on the track of recovery before you try and de-escalate. Take some time, don't be in a hurry to de-escalate. This is a third patient, an 18-year-old, newly diagnosed AML, symptomatic for almost a month before diagnosis, already received some cefoperazone sulbactam and teicoplanin outside, and blood cultures were negative. At admission here, the child was continuing to be febrile, no focus clinically identified. Counts are as high as 58,000, but it's mostly plus. So this is again febrile neutropenia. It's not because the count is high. They still don't have any neutrophils which are functional to mount a good immune response. So this is a persistent febrile neutropenia. In the sense, the patient has received 4 days of broad spectrum antibiotics. Still, he is not improving. So do I attribute it to AML and say it is just AML, or should I look for an infection? So again, the options here, should I just broaden? Should I add some CR cover? Should I add change the teicoplanin to daptomycin? Should I add some antifungal? Should I add Candida cover, or should I add mold cover? Should I get a CT chest, or should I just say it's disease and clear for chemo? So these are your options. So what would you do? It can be a multiple options of the all that I gave you. You want to do antifungal and CT chest. Okay, all of us would at least do that much, isn't it? Okay, so yeah, so there are 2 ways of looking at it. Yeah, you would still get a repeat culture because this patient has stayed outside in some hospital, so you would get a repeat culture. So what happens in these high or intermediate risk? So what is high risk means? In allo-HSCT, induction leukemia, relapsed refractory acute leukemia. These are high risk where you expect the duration of neutropenia to be longer. Again, your auto-HSCT lymphoma, all these are longer. So in these patients, if they are stable and just the fever is a concern, the idea is to keep investigating more and more until you find a focus or until your culture picks up something. Just escalating in a stable patient is the last resort that we will do. It's not something that we do upfront. Okay. So please. So all of us agree that at this point, our antenna will go up for fungal infections, isn't it? So antifungal prescribing can be a lot of ways. It can be a prophylaxis, which is because even before the symptoms have occurred. Empirical and preemptive, I will talk to you about it. And targeted is once you have identified the pathogen and you're giving a definitive therapy. So when we, please, next slide, please. So when we talk about empirical means it's a fever-driven strategy. Like this patient, the fever is ongoing. You don't know what is happening. You think there could be a high risk of an invasive fungal infection. So you start the patient on an empirical antifungal agent. Most of the times it will either be like say amphotericin B or a caspofungin, depending on the patient, whether you think Candida is high on the cards or a mold is high on the cards. But simultaneously, we will also keep working up the patient for an evidence of an invasive fungal infection. Preemptive is very strict. There you don't start antifungal, you just keep investigating. You just do all your biomarkers. Generally, galactomannan is the only thing which is sort of recommended. Beta-D-glucan is not recommended in the hem-onc setting because it is a lot of false positives. So you could do a CT chest and sinus. And if you find any evidence, you would give an antifungal. If you don't find evidence, you will keep looking, keep repeating these tests. So that is really not sort of very possible in Indian setup. One, because the turnaround time of tests is very long in India. And two, because cost is often a limiting factor. So please. So this case, so he did get started on meropenem, targocid and amphotericin B. And then later his serum galactomannan came positive and CT chest also showed a lung nodule with a surrounding GGO. So he was started on targeted therapy with voriconazole for a probable invasive aspergillosis, and trough levels were checked and within normal. So when you are using these drugs like voriconazole, posaconazole, please be sure, be mindful of drug-drug interactions and interactions with food. For example, voriconazole has to be given either 1 hour before or 2 hours after food. So please keep a note on that. And generally, TDM monitoring is advised whenever you are using drugs like azoles. Okay. The next one is a Burkitt's lymphoma, against status post chemo with on prophylaxis. Now gets a fever and develops a mild cough. There are no chest signs. So what should I do now? Should I get an X-ray, CT? What should I do? Antibiotics, antifungals. Child is only on Mycomin. Should I think of aspergillus? Okay. So this patient was just in the ward and the patient next had tested positive for flu. Sometimes it's just as simple as this. It's just trying to find a sick contact or trying to see if the patient has been exposed to something. So keep that in mind. So community acquired viruses are very common. And the problem with these, especially they had a significant trouble in lung cancer patients and hem-onc and HSCT patients. They can progress rapidly from an upper respiratory infection to a lower respiratory infection. The only way out is best your patient not to get it. Once they get it, there is hardly few things. There are few antivirals. Maybe you will try IVIG, maybe supportive care. But if you can maybe keep your staff and your patients vaccinated and keep emphasizing on isolation practices and respiratory hygiene, that's the only way out. Okay. So next case is a 14-year-old AML, again febrile neutropenia, had some pain in the right iliac fossa, loose stools. So initially, some imaging was done because he was complaining of pain. So ultrasound showed just nothing significant. Because he had loose stool, C. diff was tested, which was negative. So he was thought to have a neutropenic enterocolitis, and blood also grew ESBL Klebsiella. So he was treated with meropenem, thinking that he has a neutropenic enterocolitis. Please go on. Yeah. Gradually, when the count started recovering, he actually became worse. His pain became worse and he couldn't even stand. At that point, when we imaged him, we found that he had a right iliopsoas abscess. So that required to be drained, and that grew a whole lot of bugs, including the Klebsiella, Pseudomonas, and Enterococcus faecium. So remember that it's very difficult to pick up deep-seated foci because they hardly show any inflammatory response. And repeated imaging will be required in these patients, and especially during count recovery, their symptoms will classically worsen. So we have to have a high index of suspicion at that point. And you will often see a lot of polymicrobial cultures. So it is common in these children. So you have to in these patients, so you will have to keep covering for a lot of things. So the next one is a 4-year-old AML, again induction on posaconazole, acyclovir and cotrimoxazole, developed an RSV infection. So because the child was thought to be at high risk, we gave ribavirin, but continued to have fever. Repeatedly, blood cultures were negative. Again, a fungal workup was done. Galctomannan was negative, but CT chest was positive. So child was left on that cephalosporin, sulbactam, teicoplanin and posaconazole while continuing to investigate for what was going on. Meanwhile, had some dental infection and some pulpectomy was done. Thinking it was disease, a bone marrow was repeated. Again, that was negative. Finally, a PET was done, which again showed only a left lower lobe consolidation. So what do I do now? Do I think it is posaconazole is not working, either because the TDM is low or because should I switch to a different agent? Should I just add more antibiotics? Often when we are in doubt, we like to use cotrimoxazole, doxycycline and other things, or linezolid for that matter. Should I just do something blind like that? Or should I ask for a bronchoscopy? Yeah, many of you seem to want bronchoscopy. It's very tricky to get a bronchoscopy done in these patients when they have low counts and low platelets. But still, we have to, the idea is to get a definitive diagnosis, isn't it? So we can't keep doing things blindly. We have reached a point where we have exhausted all our options. So luckily, because it was a child, we'll do a simple test like, please press again. So we just did a gastric aspirate for expert MTB and that came as positive. So because the child could not be on rifampicin, we gave a levofloxacin based regimen and child improved. So remember that TB is not uncommon in cancer patients in India. TB, especially in lung cancers, especially in AML, TB incidence is slightly higher than in other subgroups. So they can closely mimic malignancy. So that's the problem. So you have to consider both. It can be together or it can just be TB masquerading as malignancy. And uses of, ADA is generally unhelpful in these patients because they can be elevated due to other reasons. And all granulomas will not necessarily be TB. Even cancers can show granulomatous changes. And again, you have to keep that NTM scans occasionally be there. If you have a smear positive, but your expert is negative, then think whether it could be an NTM. And we have to do a CBNAT or an AFP culture to prove that it is TB. So without that, in this day and age, to go ahead and treat a granuloma as TB is not recommended. Okay. Next one, please. So I think this will be my last. This is a 6-year-old child, BALL on maintenance, fever 5 days and just feeling very fatigued, no localization, comes with some low count and lymphocytic predominant and platelets are low. So what do you think is this? Yes. Like common things are common, and this is not a high-risk febrile neutropenia host. So this child did have dengue NS1 and IgM positive. So just because the patient lands in hemonc ward, you don't have to treat every child as febrile neutropenia. So this child went on to develop all the florid symptoms of dengue later. So with that, I'm coming to an end of my cases. So I'm just going to touch briefly. I hope Dr. Subra will take you further on this. So common questions we get asked is fluoroquinolone prophylaxis. If you look into the literature, everywhere it says that fluoroquinolone have mortality benefit in febrile neutropenia patients. You always use it in your high-risk patients and all that. But in India, you should have time to go and access the AMR report. None of our bacteria have more than 10 to 20% susceptibility to fluoroquinolones. It's a very good drug for MDR TB, which is a huge problem in India. So please try and avoid fluoroquinolones is what we would say as ID. So at least in your febrile neutropenic patients. What about GCSF? Literature is at least a little bit clear there. If you have a high-risk febrile neutropenia where you think the chance of febrile neutropenia is more than 20% more in solid organ than in hemonc, there is evidence to use GCSF to prevent a febrile neutropenic episode. What about granulocyte transfusions? Divided literature, you are not going to get a well-designed RCT in this. But if you have a patient who is just going to recover in the next few days, you have used your best of the antibiotics, but the child or the patient is still not recovering, you might give a trial of granulocyte. Again, it's more sort of inclined towards prophylaxis. If you have a patient who has had a bad fungus and then you're taking them through HSCT, then it's better to give them something like a granulocyte prophylactically so that they don't develop a reinfection or a relapse. And again, vaccination, we can talk a whole day about this. Please can you press it? Yeah. So all of us should be strong advocates of flu vaccine in all hosts, especially in your cancer patients. Please remind them to take this annually. Okay, so with that, I think I'm coming to the last slide. So febrile neutropenia is a medical emergency. So when you have access to good diagnostics, it's always easy to do a nuanced approach. Try and stratify your patients based on your diagnostics and improve not only patient outcomes, but also reduce your antimicrobial usage. And always think beyond bacterial infections, know your local or regional data, and again, de-escalation using shorter courses, stopping early. So I told you when we can do all those things. So those things will again help to prevent both cost for your patient as well as antimicrobial resistance. Again, we discussed about GCSF and granulocyte transfusions, which can be used in difficult situations. Okay, so yeah, so I think as an island of knowledge will grow, the shore of our ignorance also will keep growing. So I love this quote because this is what happens when you work in hemonc and cancer patients. So we will forever be learning. With that, I'll come to an end. So thank you all, and any questions, I will take it. Yeah. Do you need a mic? Because you will not be there. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
My question is for log therapy. Like if we want to, especially in resource limited settings, getting one line for the patient is very difficult. So if we remove that one line, we don't have any other IV access or central line access. So if you want to salvage the line, could you comment on the log therapy with antibiotics or
Remember that it is only a short term, it is not going to be a long term thing. And again, you should have a drug which is susceptible, which you can use as an antibiotic lock. And again, it's what do you say? You have to be very cautious when you use it. Obviously, anytime it can fail, and then your patient can again get an infection. So there are instances where we just use it at the end of, say, the chemo is going to get over in the next 10 days, and you just want to leave in a line for next 10 days. So that those sort of situations, it sort of makes sense to give it at least a try. But if your patient is going to try and retain the port or the line for the next few months or years, please don't do it, and don't do it for all your the what do you say, the resistant bugs or the NTMs and difficult to treat bugs. So keep it simple for simpler bugs. And like cons is probably one of the areas where we maybe try and salvage using a log therapy. Yeah. Yes. Yes. See, if we look into our data, it looks like ciprofloxacin is unlikely to work on any of the bacteria that our patients are likely to harbor, especially if we have a practice of using ciprofloxacin for prophylaxis, and then we try and treat them also with ciprofloxacin. It's highly likely to fail. So it might be that patients who improve might not have a bacterial infection. They might have something like a viral infection or something, and they are improving. But it is not a. I mean, it's not a best practice parameter to do. That's how I would say.
We have a question online, ma'am.
Yeah.
Dr. Vidya, can you comment on when to start chemo post IFI in the heme malignancies? Of course, if the leukemia is bad and needs chemo ASAP, you can start it. But what about if the chemo can wait a little bit?
I would generally wait for at least 2 weeks. That's the point when we can re-image and see some sort of difference. Before 2 weeks, imaging also is not helpful. So if you can wait for at least 2 weeks for the drugs to start working, the patient to improve, get at least a repeat imaging to make sure nothing is going bad, then we can stop. Yeah.
For all the patients,
yeah,
especially in patients. But the period of time it won't work.
Yes.
So, how long will have to continue? Or after the blood culture, how to switch over to the another antibiotic?
So that was what I was. So if you have a stable febrile neutropenic patient where your culture is negative, but whatever antibiotic you give is, I mean, you're giving some antibiotics. So in those situations, the idea is to try and see if there is something else that we are missing. Is it a virus? Is it a fungus? Is it something else? So you try and look broader than going in the direction of expanding cover, say adding a gram-positive, adding a carbapenem resistant. So that is the last thing that we do. We try and expand the diagnostics to see if we can reach something else. If we don't find anything and the patient is still neutropenic, we might land up repeat culturing and escalating. But that is again, it's sort of in your very high risk. So I'm talking about, say, HSCT, going through transplant or induction leukemia. So those are patients who can't, who won't give a lot of time. So in those situations, maybe escalating is slightly, will happen a little quicker. But in your other low risk patients, you still have time to continue the same antibiotic and look for other causes. Yes. Okay. So it depends again on what your clinical suspicion is. So generally, again, when you're talking about induction, prolonged and profound neutropenia, obviously, like your look, that is very common in your leukemic induction and HSCT. In those settings, we have to think of mold first. So mold is most common mold again in India will be Aspergillus. So at least voriconazole will be the simplest thing that you will start. If you want to be a little bit more safer, amphotericin B is a bit more broader, but you will have to de-escalate to a azole at some, switch to an azole at some point. Whereas if it's not a if say it's a solid tumor or something, or a say non-leukemia or a leukemia in a maintenance or something like that, where you where it's just a candida. Candida we usually worry about in like situations where the patient has had exposure to broad spectrum antibiotics, has a central line in place for a long time, or has a bad gut mucositis or neutropenic enterocolitis. So in these situations, the yeast cover becomes more important than the mold cover. So in those situations, echinocandin is the drug of choice. Yes. See, I will not claim to be an expert in this. I will just tell you what I have read. That is, as I said, if there is, I have a slide on that if you can just. Yeah, so this is generally recommended as a bridge measure. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. So this is just when you say if you have mostly tried in the HSCT setting where you expect the count to say recover in the next 4 or 5 days. Say you have a CR bug or say a bad fungus. You're giving your best antifungals, you're giving your best antimicrobials, but the patient is not recovering or is unlikely to recover till the count comes back, isn't it? So in those die-hard situations is where granulocytes have been tried. That is one. Second is, as I said, if a patient has already had, say, a bad fusarium pre-transplant and then is going through transplant and then count is expected to recover in the next 4 or 5 days, but the patient is showing some signs, then you would again use it as a prophylaxis. You won't even give time for the patient to show some signs. You would start giving them granulocyte infusions early to make sure that their counts come back on time. So when you're using granulocyte infusion, there are standard dose recommendations that are mentioned, and it has to be used within 6 hours of collection and all those things. Again, it's again, I think choosing your right patient is what, if it's too sick, he's anyway not going to benefit. If it's too mild, anyway, he will recover. So I think you people are the best in deciding who will benefit more than no. Because while we can advise you on what drugs to give, when a patient is going to recover from the neutropenia is not something that an ID person or a microbiologist can help you with. So you people know when the patient will. So if somebody you think is not going to recover and we have optimized and ID has done their best, then probably.